UFC star Jon Jones was arrested in New Mexico for alleged aggravated DWI and negligent use of a firearm early Thursday morning. This according to a representative for the Albuquerque Police Department. Jones was released from custody later Thursday morning per records. The UFC issued a statement saying it was aware of the situation and has been in contact with Jones' management team. Jones is considered one of the greatest pound-for-pound MMA fighters of all time, though he's had his fair share of trouble, including multiple arrests and 2 failed drug tests. It's no secret, Max, we're all big UFC fans here, and Jon is arguably the best and always puts on a show. Max, is he hurting the UFC?
No, he's not hurting the UFC, not in any real long-term way. Of course, any league, any sport, any stock ticks up and down over time. It doesn't help in the near future, but UFC will be fine. I mean, UFC's been going on since, I mean, in terms of star power, it was Royce Gracie at first with Ken Shamrock. And remember Rua, the king of the streets? This is before Zuffa even bought it. And then Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell and Brock Lesnar eventually. And we've had so many stars come and go in the UFC, and there'll be others to replace Jon Jones. Dana White will make sure this thing keeps rolling. It's increased in popularity over time. Dana knows what he's doing. And in that way, as much as you market the stars and it has kind of NBA appeal, you're really marketing the brand and it has that NFL appeal too. Really, you know what the UFC brand means, that you're going to see a very entertaining card with the best fighters in the world and all that. No, I don't think he's hurting the UFC so much as he's hurting himself. Jon, what are you doing? Maybe it's that when you reach a certain level, he's already accomplished a lot. He already has some people say he's the best of all time. Maybe at a certain point, you just don't think it's worth the extra effort to really be as good as you could have ever been and accomplish the most. But Stephen A., you and I have seen fighters like in boxing come and go. Remember Hector Macho Camacho at 130 pounds? He should have been one of the greatest fighters ever. But his career didn't pan out that way in the end. And Jon Jones, as excellent as he's been, you know, he's going to go down at least as like a Mike Tyson type. But do you want to be that? I mean, it's great to be Mike Tyson, an all-time great and global figure in all this, and generations will remember you. But when people talk about the greatest of all time, they don't say Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson doesn't even say Mike Tyson. You talk about Muhammad Ali. What does Jon Jones want to be? He wants to be a phenom that made his mark, or does he want to try to be the GOAT for real? Because I know it feels like athletes feel like they're invincible. It's just going to keep going on forever. Nope. One day he'll be old like everyone else. He won't be able to do it anymore. And then whatever he did is what he did. I don't think he's hurting the UFC, Stephen A. I think he's just hurting himself.
Well, I agree with you there. We don't have much of a disagreement there, but I'll elaborate just a little bit differently from the standpoint that not only is he hurting himself, I think that when you look at him in the octagon, I thought that last fight, I think it was against Smith, if I remember correctly, I don't think he looked that great, and a legitimate argument could be made that he should have lost that fight. Why do I bring that up? Because we're not only hearing about there was a gun, we're also hearing about there was a half-empty bottle of tequila or whatever it is. So in other words, the incident in question right now involves a firearm and it involves alcohol. There was a previous incident, a battery charge, if I remember correctly, where it involved a cocktail waitress in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There was an incident in 2015. There was a hit-and-run incident. Of course, there was the issue of drugs where it came to fighting Daniel Cormier, and that fight ultimately was called off. So when you look at the plethora of problems, you know, he's doing damage to himself, and one could easily argue he's so great that he's been able to overcome it from time to time when he's been inside the octagon, but in the same breath, the level of dominance that you expect from him, you have not witnessed. And one has to wonder why that is. If you're consuming alcohol, or dare I say something else, and you're not taking care of yourself the way that you should be or customarily did prior to the last few years, that's when we've got to wonder about when the clock's going to tick on him and whether or not his time is up. He clearly has some issues he has to deal with. I am a huge, huge fan of Jon Bones Jones. I wish him nothing but the best. He's a great fighter. He tries to deliver the goods every time he steps into the octagon. He goes for it and what have you. But in the end, it's incredibly alarming. And I'm going to go back to a few years ago when that fight was called off because of the failed drug test, if I remember correctly, or what have you. He was supposed to fight Daniel Cormier.
But the Cormier
I
fight?
will never forget.
Yeah.
That's right. I will never forget the class that Daniel Cormier showed him. Because you got to remember, it was called off, big money at stake. It was right there, and obviously they couldn't stand one another and throwing invectives at each other. Jon Bones Jones was just as guilty of it as Daniel Cormier. But when that happened, Daniel Cormier could have got in front of that microphone and called him everything but a child of God. And everyone would have understood it because of how much he despised the guy. But he didn't do it. And I remember
Stephen
that
A.,
because
when you
even
look
Jon
at-
Bones Jones had to admit that. You got to remember stuff like that. It's a problem because he recognizes there's problems here.
When you look, you know how they say it's harder to stay on top than to get to the top? When you look at the greatest champions of this era, okay, in each sport, Tom Brady, LeBron James, combat sports, Floyd Mayweather. It's one thing to hit a peak and then fall off because you can get bored. You can think that you psychologically or emotionally, you've already done it. How do you... Tom Brady, year after year, took it and still takes it like nothing I did matters. It matters what I do right now. And wanted to make all those, like a champion, making a lot of title defenses. Same thing with LeBron James. You have to admire the longevity and the ability to put themselves through that year after year with no break. Even Michael Jordan, it seemed, in the middle needed a little break. Guys like Brady and LeBron who keep grinding. You know, there's something to that. Floyd Mayweather, too. Floyd Mayweather never lost, prepared for each fight as, you know, as though it was his Super Bowl or whatever. Jon Jones said to me, I remember he was interested in, and I don't believe I'm betraying a confidence, but he was interested at a certain time in boxing. And he was looking at the Klitschko's and looking at different boxers. And I remember telling him at the time, because he was wiping everyone out at the time, Stephen, and I bring this up because you mentioned he just survived the fight by the skin of his teeth and got the win. I remember, like, any one of these cats, any one of them could beat anyone else on any given night. That's the nature of the UFC. It's one of the things that makes it so interesting is in MMA, everyone's a de facto one-punch knockout artist because either they can strike or they can isolate a limb and hyperextend it or choke out your air passages. And that's from one false move. The difference at the very top of the sport isn't that great, which is why when a guy like Jones is dominating, it's amazing. But, like, you slip a little bit, you take your eyes off the prize, you take stuff for granted, you could easily lose. That's what makes Brady and LeBron and Floyd different than the others. Does Jon Jones want to be one of those guys, yes or no?
Well, the answer right now, Max, I think could
Stephen.
easily say no. You could easily say the answer is no because when I sit up there and listen, LeBron James, for example, is a 3-time champion and he's been in 9 NBA Finals. I think the greatest thing that we'll be able to say about LeBron James is that in 17 plus years in the league, he never cheated us. He always showed up. He was always in peak condition. He was always ready to go. And so whether he had a great game or a good game or whatever, you never looked at him and said, you're not at your best. Something is wrong with you, with the exception of one playoff game against Boston in 2008, if I remember correct, 2009. Except with the exception of that, you never looked at LeBron James and wondered what's wrong with him, ever. The point is, Kobe Bryant, God rest his soul, constantly never cheated us. Michael Jordan, when he stepped on the court, constantly never cheated us. You look at Jon Bones Jones, and now you're sitting there and you're watching him and you're saying, yeah, you're still great, but what are you really, really giving us? Because you've compromised yourself with whatever it is you're doing with your life. And I think he needs to get it together in that regard.
No question. And one thing I just want to add, guys, he's had his belt stripped 3 times at this point, and we're talking about drinking and driving. I think he's facing some serious demons, and I'd like to see him get help because we're saying, how could this hurt the UFC? Forget the UFC and forget just hurting Jon. When you get behind the wheel, you can threaten an innocent person's life. So these are serious matters, and he's one of the best. Yeah, he's one of the best to ever do it, and I really want Jon to get the help that he needs so he can move forward. We will leave it on that note. When we come back here, you guys mentioned Michael Jordan. It's actually a huge anniversary for Jordan. So with that, we're asking who is most like Jordan in today's game. And let me tell you, you're going to be very surprised by one Stephen A's answer. Also, Booger McFarland will join us. We're going to focus in on the Saints. Should Drew Brees and New Orleans be the favorites in the NFC? We dive into it. First Take.
I feel on top of the world. I feel on top of the world right now. I feel on top of the world. I feel on top of the world right now.